I never thought my decision to build a greenhouse would turn into a full-scale war with the Meadowbrook Heights HOA. But when Patricia Hendricks showed up at my door, demanding I heat their pump house with my propane supply, I knew things were about to get interesting. My name is Warren Cunningham, and I have lived in this subdivision outside Charlotte, North Carolina for 3 years. The neighborhood seemed perfect when I bought my property, a decent lot size with enough space for the small hobby farm I had always dreamed of. The house sat on just over an acre, which by HOA standards was generous. Most people had half that. I used the extra space to build a proper greenhouse where I grew vegetables year-round and kept a small collection of tropical plants that reminded me of the years I spent working in Florida. The greenhouse was my pride and joy. It was a professional-grade structure, 30 feet long and 15 feet wide, with automated climate control and a dedicated propane heating system. I had saved for 2 years to build it properly, getting all the necessary permits from the county and making sure everything was up to code. The propane tank sat just outside, a standard 500-gallon unit that I filled twice a year. It was more than enough for my needs, and I had calculated the costs down to the penny. Everything was fine until last November when Patricia Hendricks, the HOA president, noticed my setup during one of her nosiness patrols around the neighborhood. I was tending to my tomato plants when I heard her voice calling from the driveway. Warren Cunningham. I looked up to see her marching across my lawn in her typical power outfit, a burgundy pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her bleached blonde hair was pulled back so tight it looked painful, and her lips were pursed in that way that meant she had found something new to complain about. "Yes, Patricia," I called back, stepping out of the greenhouse and wiping the dirt from my hands. She stopped a few feet away, her eyes fixed on the propane tank. "Is that a propane tank?" "It is, for heating the greenhouse, all permitted and inspected." Her expression shifted into what I can only describe as predatory interest. "How large is it?" 500 gallons. "Why?" "And you fill it yourself? You have your own supplier?" I was confused by the line of questioning. "Yes, I use Henderson propane out of Charlotte. They come twice a year, sometimes 3 times in harsh winters. Is there a problem?" Patricia smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "No problem at all. I just had no idea you had such a resource. This could actually be quite beneficial for the community." The way she said "community" made my stomach turn. I had heard that tone before, usually right before she announced some new fee or restriction that benefited nobody but made her feel important. "Beneficial how?" I asked carefully. "Well, you know the pump house for our community pool. It needs to stay heated during winter to prevent the pipes from freezing. We have been using electric heaters, but the costs have been astronomical. If we could tap into your propane supply, it would save the HOA thousands of dollars annually." I stared at her for a long moment, trying to process what she was actually suggesting. "You want to use my propane, the propane I pay for. The HOA would reimburse you, of course. We would pay for whatever we use. That does not make any sense. Why would you not just get your own tank installed at the pump house?" Her smile tightened. "The board has decided it is not cost-effective to install a new system when a perfectly good resource already exists in the neighborhood. A resource I paid for, that I use for my greenhouse." "Warren, you need to think about what is best for the community. We all make sacrifices for the greater good." I felt my jaw clench. "Patricia, I am not interested in sharing my propane supply. If the HOA needs propane, you can install your own tank. Henderson Propane serves commercial clients too. I am happy to give you their number." Her expression went cold. The board will be very disappointed to hear you are being uncooperative. The board can be as disappointed as they want. The answer is no." She turned on her heel and stalked back to her white Mercedes SUV without another word. I watched her drive away, already knowing this was not the end of the conversation. I was right. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA. The letter informed me that my propane tank was in violation of community standards because it was visible from the street and therefore constituted an eyesore. I was given 30 days to relocate or screen it appropriately, with any screening subject to Architectural Review Board approval. The thing was, my tank was not visible from the street. It sat behind my house, tucked next to the greenhouse, with a tall privacy fence between it and the road. You could not see it unless you came onto my property and walked around back. I took photos from every angle of the street to document this, then sent a response letter to the HOA explaining that their claim was factually incorrect. The reply came quickly. Patricia herself called me that evening. "Warren, I received your letter," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I think there has been a misunderstanding." "There has been no misunderstanding. My tank is not visible from the street. Your violation notice is baseless. Several residents have complained about the industrial appearance of your property." "Name them." "That is confidential." "Of course it is." She sighed dramatically. "Warren, why are you making this so difficult? All we are asking for is a little cooperation. If you would just agree to share your propane supply with the pump house, I am sure the board would find your tank placement acceptable." There it was. The real agenda. "So this is blackmail," I said flatly. "That is a very ugly word. I prefer to think of it as community cooperation. You scratch our backs, we scratch yours." "Patricia, listen very carefully. I'm not sharing my propane supply with the HOA. That tank is for my personal use. If you continue to harass me with false violations, I will contact a lawyer." "That would be unfortunate." "Legal fees can be so expensive, cannot they? And the HOA has much deeper pockets than individual homeowners." The threat was not even subtle. She was counting on me backing down rather than fighting. "Good night, Patricia," I said and hung up. Over the next few weeks, I received 3 more violation notices. One claimed my greenhouse was not the approved color, despite being the same shade of green as every other garden structure in the neighborhood. Another said my lawn was not being maintained to community standards, even though I paid a landscaping service to cut it weekly. The third claimed I was running a business out of my home because I occasionally sold vegetables at the local farmers market on Saturdays. Each violation came with the threat of fines starting at $100 and increasing exponentially for each day I remained in non-compliance. I documented everything, took photos, kept copies of all correspondence. I also called my lawyer, a guy named Tom who had helped me with the house purchase. "This is textbook harassment," Tom said when I laid out everything for him. "The problem is, fighting an HOA is expensive and time-consuming. They know this. They are counting on you giving in rather than spending thousands in legal fees. So what do I do? You can sue for harassment, but it will cost you at least 10 grand to start, probably more. You can pay the fines and comply with their demands, which is what they want. Or you can look for a creative solution that gives them what they want without actually giving them what they want." "What do you mean?" "Well, they want access to your propane, right? What if you made it impossible for them to access it, but in a way that is completely legal and within your rights?" I thought about that for a while. An idea started forming, but I needed more information first. I called Henderson Propane the next morning and spoke with the owner, a crusty old guy named Bill who had been in the business for 40 years. "Bill, I have a weird question. If someone ran a line from my tank to another property without my permission, what would happen?" Bill was quiet for a moment. "That would be theft of service, for one thing, also a safety violation. Nobody should be tapping into a private propane system without the owner's consent and proper inspection. Why? Someone trying to steal your gas, something like that. If I wanted to prevent anyone from being able to use my propane except me, what could I do?" "Well, you own the tank and the lines. You could cap everything off except your direct feed to the greenhouse. Make it so there is no way to add additional connections without cutting into the line, which would be illegal." "Could you do that for me?" "Sure could. When do you want me to come out?" We scheduled it for the following Tuesday. Bill showed up with his assistant and spent 2 hours reconfiguring my propane system. When they were done, the only accessible connection point was the line running directly into my greenhouse. Everything else was capped and locked with industrial-grade fittings that required special tools to remove. "This is about as secure as it gets," Bill said, walking me through the changes. "The only way someone could tap into this now is by cutting directly into the line, which would be a felony. It would also cause a gas leak, which is dangerous as hell." "Perfect," I said, paying him for the work. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. A week later, I came home from work to find a construction crew in my backyard. I parked my truck and ran around to see what was happening. 2 men in reflective vests were examining my propane tank while a third was unrolling what looked like copper piping. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded. One of the men looked up, startled. "HOA hired us to run a gas line from this tank to the pump house." "Like hell they did." "This is my property and my propane tank. Who authorized this?" He pulled out a work order. "Patricia Hendricks. She said it was approved." "It absolutely is not approved. You need to leave. Now." The guy looked nervous. "Look, mister, we are just doing what we were hired to do." "I do not care." "You are on my property without my permission, attempting to access my private utilities. That is illegal. Leave now or I am calling the police." They must have heard the seriousness in my voice because they packed up quickly and left. I immediately called Patricia. "You sent contractors to my house," I said as soon as she answered. "The HOA is simply exercising its rights to community resources." "My propane tank is not a community resource. It is my private property. According to the covenants, all properties within the subdivision are subject to HOA authority for the benefit of the community. Show me the clause that says I have to provide my personal utilities to the HOA." The board has interpreted the cooperation clause broadly. "Patricia, if you send anyone onto my property again without my permission, I will have them arrested for trespassing, and I will sue you personally for harassment. You cannot afford to sue me, Warren. We both know that." I hung up before I said something I would regret. My hands were shaking with anger. This had gone way too far. That night, I went through my HOA covenants page by page, highlighting every relevant section. Tom was right. There was plenty of language about homeowners cooperating with the HOA, but nothing that granted them access to personal property or utilities. The covenants covered things like exterior paint colors, lawn maintenance, and architectural standards. Nothing about commandeering someone's propane supply. I scanned everything and emailed it to Tom with a detailed timeline of events. He called me the next morning. "This is good," he said. "You have a solid harassment case. I can send them a cease and desist letter that will hopefully shut this down." "Do it," I said. The letter went out that afternoon via certified mail and email. It was a beautiful piece of legal writing that basically said if the HOA did not stop harassing me immediately, we would sue for damages, attorney fees, and emotional distress. Tom included copies of all the bogus violation notices, photos proving they were baseless, and a detailed account of the attempted unauthorized utility access. For about a week, things were quiet. I started to think maybe Patricia had finally gotten the message. Then I came home one evening to find my propane line had been cut, not just disconnected or tampered with, actually cut. Someone had taken a hacksaw or bolt cutters to the copper line running from my tank to the greenhouse. Propane was hissing out into the air, and I could smell the distinctive rotten egg odor from the driveway. I immediately called 911. This was not just vandalism, it was dangerous. A spark anywhere near that leak could cause an explosion. The fire department arrived within minutes, followed by police. They evacuated my house and the two houses on either side while they shut off the tank and ventilated the area. A fire marshal inspected the damage and took photos. "Someone deliberately cut this line," he said, showing me the clean saw marks. "This was not an accident. Do you have any idea who might have done this?" I told him everything. The whole saga with Patricia and the HOA, the harassment, the violation notices, the attempted unauthorized access. The officer taking my statement wrote it all down carefully. "We will investigate," he said. "In the meantime, you should document all the damage and contact your insurance company." Bill from Henderson Propane came out the next morning to assess the repairs. "This is bad," he said, kneeling next to the severed line. "Not just the cost of replacing the line, but this could have killed someone. If that gas had found an ignition source, your whole house could have gone up. How much to fix it? Parts and labor, probably $2,000. And I will have to get the fire marshal to sign off before I can restore service. This is a serious safety incident." I filed a police report specifically naming the HOA and Patricia Hendricks as potential suspects, given their previous attempts to access my propane system. I also filed an insurance claim, though my deductible meant I would still be paying most of the repair costs out of pocket. Tom was livid when I told him. "They have gone too far. This is criminal. We are talking vandalism, reckless endangerment, maybe even attempted theft of services. I am going to contact the DA's office." While the investigation was ongoing, I had to heat my greenhouse with expensive electric heaters. My propane system was red-tagged until the repairs were complete and inspected. I watched my plants struggle with the inconsistent temperatures, and I calculated how much money I was losing both in electricity costs and potential plant damage. 3 days after the incident, I got a call from a detective named Rodriguez who was assigned to the case. "Mr. Cunningham, I have been reviewing the evidence. Do you have any security cameras on your property?" "No," I said. "I never thought I would need them." "That is unfortunate. Without video evidence, it is going to be hard to prove who cut your line." "Do you have any witnesses who saw someone on your property that day?" "No, I was at work. Is there any other evidence?" "We are checking for fingerprints on your tank and the tools that might have been used, but it is a long shot. Most vandals know to wear gloves." I also spoke with Patricia Hendricks. She denies any involvement and says the HOA would never condone criminal activity. Of course she does. "I believe you that there is history here, and that makes her a person of interest. But without direct evidence, my hands are tied. The best I can do is keep the investigation open and hope something turns up." It was frustrating, but I understood. The legal system needed proof, not just circumstantial evidence and motive. That weekend, I installed security cameras. 6 of them, covering every angle of my property with cloud backup and motion detection. If anyone came near my propane system again, I would have video evidence. Bill completed the repairs the following week. The new line was even more secure than before, and he added a locked cage around the tank and connections. If someone wants to mess with this now, they will have to cut through steel, he said. I paid him, added the receipt to my growing file of HOA-related expenses, and tried to get back to normal life. But I was angry. Angry about the harassment, the vandalism, the fact that Patricia seemed to think she could do whatever she wanted without consequences. 2 weeks later, I received another notice from the HOA. This one informed me that my failure to share community resources as requested constituted a violation of the cooperation clause, and I was being fined $500. Additionally, my voting rights in the HOA were being suspended until I complied. I called Tom immediately. Can they do this legally? No. The cooperation clause does not give them authority to confiscate your personal property. And they definitely cannot suspend your voting rights for refusing to comply with an illegal demand. This is retaliation, pure and simple. So what do? We sue. I was hoping to avoid it, but they have left us no choice. I will draw up the paperwork. The lawsuit was filed the following Monday. We were suing the HOA and Patricia Hendricks personally for harassment, illegal fines, retaliation, and the cost of repairing the vandalized propane line. We were asking for actual damages, legal fees, and punitive damages. Tom was confident we would win, but he warned me it could take months or even years to work through the system. In the meantime, I refused to pay the $500 fine. The HOA responded by placing a lien on my property, which meant I could not sell or refinance until it was resolved. It was another pressure tactic, but I was not backing down. Then something unexpected happened. Other homeowners started reaching out to me. The first was my neighbor, a guy named Steve who lived 3 houses down. He knocked on my door one evening holding a beer and looking uncomfortable. "Warren, I heard about what is happening with the HOA," he said. "I just wanted you to know I think it is complete garbage. Patricia has been pulling this crap for years and I am sick of it." "Thanks," I said, surprised. "I did not realize other people had problems with her." "Are you kidding?" "She fined me $300 last year because my mailbox was the wrong shade of black. Not the wrong color, the wrong shade. I had to repaint it twice before she approved it. And the Johnsons 2 streets over, she made them tear down a playground they built for their kids because it was 6 inches taller than the height limit. That is insane. It is a power trip. She loves having control over everyone. But most people just pay the fines and comply because fighting the HOA is too expensive and stressful. You are the first person I have seen actually stand up to her." Over the next few days, more neighbors contacted me. Some called, some stopped by, and a few sent emails. Every one of them had a story about Patricia abusing her power. Ridiculous fines, arbitrary rule enforcement, and threats of legal action. A pattern was emerging, and it was not pretty. One woman named Sarah told me Patricia had fined her for having the wrong color curtains visible from the street. Another guy said Patricia had tried to force him to cut down a tree that was blocking her view, even though it was on his property and had been there for 20 years. The stories went on and on. "Why does not anyone vote her out?" I asked Steve during one conversation. "She controls the board. All her friends are on it, and they vote as a block. Anyone who runs against them gets harassed until they drop out or move away. It is a rigged system." An idea started forming in my head. If I could document all of this abuse, show a pattern of harassment and illegal behavior, it might help my case. It might also give other homeowners the courage to stand up. I started collecting statements. I created a detailed spreadsheet of every complaint, fine, and incident people reported. I asked for documentation, copies of violation notices, records of fines paid. The response was overwhelming. Within 2 weeks, I had statements from over 30 homeowners describing years of abuse by Patricia and the HOA board. Tom was thrilled when I showed him. This is exactly what we need. It establishes a clear pattern of behavior. We can use this to show that what happened to you was not an isolated incident, but part of a systematic abuse of power. We amended our lawsuit to include the additional evidence. We also sent copies to every member of the HOA board who was not part of Patricia's inner circle, hoping to create some internal pressure. The response was swift and ugly. Patricia called an emergency HOA meeting and announced that anyone who had participated in my smear campaign would face retaliation. She specifically mentioned that the HOA would be looking closely at every property for violations and enforcing rules with extreme prejudice. But her threat backfired. Instead of scaring people into silence, it made them angry. The meeting turned into a shouting match, with homeowners demanding Patricia's resignation and calling for an audit of HOA finances. Things got so heated that someone called the police to maintain order. I was not at the meeting because I was not invited, but Steve recorded it on his phone and sent me the video. Watching Patricia lose control of the room was satisfying in a way I cannot quite describe. For years, she had ruled through intimidation, and now people were pushing back. The next development came from an unexpected source. A woman named Jennifer Morrison reached out to me through Facebook. She had been on the HOA board 2 years ago but resigned after clashing with Patricia. "I have information you need to see," she said when we met for coffee. She slid a manila folder across the table. "I made copies before I left the board. I probably should have done something with them sooner, but I was afraid of retaliation." I opened the folder and started reading. Inside were financial records showing that Patricia had been using HOA funds for personal expenses, dinners at expensive restaurants charged as board meetings, a new laptop purchased as office equipment but delivered to her home address, even a weekend trip to Miami Beach billed as a conference, though there was no record of any actual conference attendance. "How much are we talking about?" I asked. "Over the 2 years I was on the board, at least $20,000, probably more before and after." She is very careful about hiding it in legitimate-looking expense categories, but if you know what to look for, it is obvious. "Why did you not report this?" Jennifer looked down at her coffee. "I tried. I went to the other board members, but they all said I was overreacting. Patricia convinced them I was jealous of her leadership position. I realized I could not win, so I resigned. I am ashamed I did not push harder." "Well, we are going to push now," I said, making copies of everything on my phone. Tom nearly jumped out of his chair when I showed him the financial records. "This is fraud. Embezzlement. This is not just a civil matter anymore, this is criminal. We need to turn this over to the police and the DA." We made a formal complaint to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department Fraud Division. Detective Rodriguez was assigned to that case too, and he was very interested in what we had found. "Financial crimes in HOAs are more common than people realize," he said, reviewing the documents. "These organizations handle large amounts of money with minimal oversight. It is easy for someone in Patricia's position to abuse that power. I will need to get the full financial records from the HOA, but this is enough to start an investigation." Things moved quickly after that. The police obtained a warrant for the HOA's financial records and computers. Forensic accountants started going through everything. Patricia hired a lawyer, which told me she knew she was in serious trouble. The propane situation, meanwhile, had reached an absurd conclusion. The HOA pump house pipes froze in January because they never found an alternative heating solution. The pipes burst, causing thousands of dollars in damage to the pump house and the surrounding equipment. The pool would need major repairs before it could open for the summer season. At the next HOA meeting, which I did attend this time, Patricia actually tried to blame me for the frozen pipes. If Warren Cunningham had been willing to work with us, none of this would have happened, she announced to the assembled homeowners. His refusal to share his propane supply has cost this community dearly. I stood up, and the room went quiet. Patricia, you tried to steal my propane. When I refused, you harassed me with fake violations, sent contractors onto my property without permission, and someone vandalized my system, causing thousands of dollars in damage and creating a serious safety hazard. The frozen pipes are the direct result of your mismanagement and your illegal attempts to take something that did not belong to the HOA. That is slander, Patricia shouted. It is documented fact. I have photos, videos, witness statements, and police reports. I also have financial records showing you have embezzled at least $20,000 from the HOA over the past several years. The police are investigating that right now, by the way. The room erupted. People were shouting questions, demanding answers, and calling for Patricia's immediate resignation. She tried to gavel the meeting back to order, but nobody was listening anymore. One of the other board members, a guy named Richard who had always seemed uncomfortable with Patricia's tactics, stood up. I move that we immediately suspend Patricia Hendricks from her duties as HOA president, pending the outcome of the police investigation. All in favor. Nearly every hand in the room went up. Patricia looked around in shock, her face flushed red. You cannot do this. I am the president. Not anymore, Richard said calmly. You are suspended effective immediately. Please surrender any HOA property in your possession, including keys, files, and the checkbook. Patricia grabbed her purse and stormed out, but not before shooting me a look of pure hatred. I did not care. I was done being intimidated by her. Over the next few months, multiple things happened. The forensic accounting uncovered that Patricia had stolen nearly $40,000 from the HOA over 5 years. She had been very clever about hiding it, spreading the theft across dozens of small transactions and fake expenses. But once investigators knew what to look for, the evidence was overwhelming. She was arrested in March on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and theft. The arrest made the local news, and I admit I felt a surge of satisfaction watching the footage of her being led out of her house in handcuffs. My lawsuit against the HOA was settled out of court. They agreed to drop all fines and liens against my property, pay for all my legal expenses, pay for the damage to my propane system, and compensate me for the harassment and emotional distress. The total settlement was $65,000. I used part of it to upgrade my greenhouse and donated the rest to a legal fund helping other homeowners fight HOA abuse. The vandalism of my propane line was never conclusively solved. The police suspected Patricia had hired someone to do it, but they could not prove it without cooperation from the person who actually cut the line, and nobody came forward. It was listed as an unsolved case, though everyone involved knew who was responsible. Patricia's trial happened in September. She pleaded guilty to avoid a longer sentence and was sentenced to 2 years in prison, plus restitution to the HOA for the stolen funds. Her lawyer argued for probation, but the judge said the length and deliberate nature of the theft warranted jail time. the HOA underwent a complete overhaul. New board members were elected, including Steve and several other homeowners who had been vocal about reform. They rewrote the bylaws to include checks and balances, financial transparency, and limits on board power. They also hired a professional management company to handle day-to-day operations, removing the opportunity for any one person to wield the kind of control Patricia had. As for me, my greenhouse is thriving. I have expanded my operation and now sell vegetables at 3 different farmers' markets every weekend. I even started offering workshops on winter gardening, which has been surprisingly popular. My propane system works perfectly, secured behind a locked cage and monitored by security cameras. I still live in Meadowbrook Heights, though I keep my head down and focus on my own business. The neighborhood is a much different place now, more cooperative and less hostile. People actually talk to each other instead of reporting violations. It feels like a real community for the first time since I moved in. Every now and then, someone will stop me at the grocery store or the hardware store and thank me for standing up to Patricia. They tell me stories about how life has improved in the neighborhood, how they feel like they can breathe easier without the constant threat of arbitrary fines and harassment. Those conversations make everything I went through worthwhile. The pump house was eventually repaired, and the HOA installed their own propane system with a proper tank and professional installation. It cost them significantly more than it would have if they had just done it that way in the first place, but I suppose some lessons have to be learned the hard way. I learned some lessons too. I learned that standing up to bullies is exhausting and expensive but necessary. I learned that documentation is everything, that you should never assume someone in authority is acting in good faith, and that security cameras are a worthwhile investment. Most importantly, I learned that I was not alone, that there were dozens of other people in my community who were fed up with the same abuse but did not know how to fight back. Tom, my lawyer, stayed on retainer for a few months after everything was settled, just in case Patricia tried anything after her release from prison. But she ended up moving out of state when she got out, and I have not heard from her since. Her house was sold to cover her restitution payments and legal fees. The story spread beyond our neighborhood through local news coverage and social media. I started getting calls from homeowners in other subdivisions who were dealing with similar HOA problems. I could not help them all, but I shared my documentation strategies and connected them with lawyers who specialized in HOA law. A few reporters even interviewed me about HOA abuse, which led to a series of articles in the Charlotte Observer about the need for HOA reform at the state level. Nothing has changed legislatively yet, but there is growing awareness of the problem. Several state representatives have proposed bills to increase oversight of HOAs and make it easier for homeowners to challenge improper fines and rules. I testified in favor of one such bill, though it died in committee. These things take time, but at least the conversation is happening. My relationship with the new HOA board is cordial but distant. I pay my dues, follow the reasonable rules, and otherwise keep to myself. They have not bothered me, and I have not given them any reason to. It is how an HOA should work, boring and functional rather than dramatic and oppressive. Steve and I became good friends through all this. We have a standing Sunday morning coffee meetup where we catch up on neighborhood news and complain about work. He helped me build a new section of greenhouse last spring, and I helped him landscape his backyard. It is nice having an ally who understands what I went through. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if I should have just moved when the harassment started. It would have been easier in the short term, less stressful and expensive. But then Patricia would still be president, still stealing from the HOA, still terrorizing homeowners. The next person who stood up to her might not have had the resources or documentation to fight back effectively. By staying and fighting, I helped create change that benefited everyone in the community. That does not mean it was easy or that I would want to do it again. The stress of that year aged me. I spent countless nights lying awake, worrying about legal bills and what Patricia might do next. I snapped at friends and family over minor things because I was wound so tight. There were days I seriously considered just giving in, letting her have access to my propane, paying the fines, whatever it took to make the harassment stop. But something kept me going, probably stubbornness more than courage. I had worked hard for everything I had. I had saved and planned and built my greenhouse carefully and legally. The idea that someone could just take it, could force me to give up something I had earned, made me angry enough to keep fighting even when it felt hopeless. The civil lawsuit took 10 months from filing to settlement. During that time, I had to give depositions, produce documents, and relive the harassment over and over. Tom was great at walking me through the process, but it was grueling. The HOA's lawyers tried every trick to make me give up, including filing motions to dismiss, demanding excessive documentation, and scheduling depositions at inconvenient times, but we had the evidence on our side. The violation notices that were clearly baseless. The testimony from other homeowners about Patricia's pattern of abuse, the attempted unauthorized access to my propane system, Jennifer's financial documents, security footage from after I installed cameras. It was overwhelming, and the HOA's lawyers eventually advised them to settle rather than go to trial. The criminal case was separate and moved on its own timeline. Detective Rodriguez and the fraud investigators built a meticulous case, documenting every fraudulent expense and tracing the money. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that the expenses were legitimate, but the evidence was too clear. HOA board meetings at restaurants that did not exist, conference registrations that could not be verified, equipment purchases that never made it to HOA property. The breaking point came when they found that Patricia had used HOA funds to pay for her daughter's wedding venue. She had disguised it as a payment to a landscaping company, but the investigators tracked the check to a wedding venue in Asheville. When confronted with that evidence, Patricia's lawyer advised her to take the plea deal. At her sentencing, Patricia gave a tearful statement about how she had made mistakes and let the stress of the position get to her. She talked about all the work she had done for the community, the time and effort she had volunteered. The judge listened politely, then pointed out that embezzling $40,000 was not a mistake. It was a deliberate and sustained pattern of theft. The 2-year sentence reflected the seriousness of what she had done. I was in the courtroom for the sentencing. I wanted to see it through to the end, to have closure. Patricia did not look at me once during the proceedings. I do not know if she felt guilty or just did not want to acknowledge that I had been the catalyst for her downfall. Either way, I did not need her acknowledgement. The justice system had spoken. After everything was settled, I took a long vacation. I drove down to the Florida Keys and spent 2 weeks doing absolutely nothing but fishing, reading, and watching sunsets. I needed to decompress, to remind myself that there was more to life than legal battles and HOA drama. It helped. By the time I got back to Charlotte, I felt like myself again. My greenhouse has continued to evolve. I added a second structure last year, this one focused on herbs and flowers. I sell bouquets at the farmers' markets now too, which has been surprisingly profitable. People love buying locally grown flowers that have not been shipped halfway across the country. I have been experimenting with unusual varieties, things you cannot find at grocery stores, and they sell out almost immediately. I also started a YouTube channel documenting my growing techniques. It started as a way to share knowledge with other hobbyists, but it has grown into something bigger. I have about 50,000 subscribers now, and the ad revenue covers most of my greenhouse operating costs. People seem to appreciate the straightforward, practical advice without a lot of drama or sales pitches. The irony is not lost on me that the HOA's attempts to steal my propane ended up pushing me toward a more successful and diversified operation. If they had just left me alone, I probably would have continued with my modest hobby greenhouse, growing vegetables for personal use and selling a little on the side. Instead, their harassment forced me to fight back, which gave me a platform and visibility that turned my hobby into a real business. I still use propane to heat my greenhouses. I upgraded to a 1,000-gallon tank to support the expanded operation, and Henderson Propane still comes to fill it regularly. Bill always asks how things are going with the HOA, and I always tell him everything is quiet. He laughs and says that is how it should be. The neighborhood pool opened on schedule last summer after the repairs were completed. The new propane heating system for the pump house works fine. I swim there sometimes, usually early in the morning before it gets crowded. Nobody treats me differently or brings up the past. It is just another day at the community pool. I ran into Jennifer Morrison at the grocery store a few months ago. She thanked me again for taking her information and doing something with it. She said she felt guilty for years about keeping quiet, knowing Patricia was stealing but not having the courage to speak up. I told her I understood, that taking on the HOA was not something most people could afford to do financially or emotionally. What mattered was that she eventually did the right thing. Steve got elected to the HOA board last fall. He ran on a platform of transparency and common sense enforcement of rules. He won easily, which shows how much the neighborhood has changed. During his campaign, several people mentioned my fight with Patricia as the turning point that made them realize they could have a voice in how the community was run. The new board has been aggressively boring in the best possible way. They maintain common areas, collect dues, enforce reasonable rules consistently, and publish detailed financial reports quarterly. There are no power trips, no arbitrary fines, no harassment. It is exactly what an HOA should be, invisible until you need it. I still have all my documentation filed away in a storage box in my office. Photos, emails, violation notices, legal filings, financial records. I probably do not need to keep it anymore, but it feels important somehow, a record of what happened and how it was resolved. Maybe someday I will write a book about it, a cautionary tale about HOA abuse and the importance of standing up for your rights. For now, I am focused on my greenhouses and my YouTube channel and living a quiet life. I date occasionally, but nothing serious. I have dinner with Steve and his wife every few weeks. I visit my parents in Ohio a couple times a year. I go to the farmers' markets every Saturday. It is a good life, peaceful and productive, and I appreciate it more because of what I went through to protect it. The cut propane line, the harassment, the legal battles, all of it seems like a distant nightmare now, but the lessons stuck with me. I know my rights better. I understand how HOAs work and what they can and cannot do. I recognize the warning signs of abuse of power. And I know I have the strength to fight back when necessary, even when it is hard and expensive and scary. That is the real victory, not the settlement money or Patricia going to jail, but the knowledge that I stood up for myself and won. Nobody can take that away from me. The greenhouse is warm tonight, filled with the smell of tomato plants and herbs. I walk through checking on everything, adjusting temperature settings, watering where needed. This is my sanctuary, the place I built with my own planning and money and effort. The propane heater hums quietly, keeping everything at the perfect temperature. My propane, my system, my choice. Outside, the neighborhood is quiet under the stars. Lights glow in windows up and down the street. Somewhere a dog barks. A car drives past. Normal suburban life, the kind of peaceful existence I moved here seeking. It took a fight to secure that peace, but it was worth it. I lock up the greenhouse and head back to the house, already thinking about what I will plant next season. Maybe some specialty peppers, those colorful varieties that always draw attention at the market. Or perhaps more flowers. The business side has been growing faster than I expected. Either way, it is my decision to make, my business to run, my property to manage. That is all I ever wanted, the freedom to live my life on my terms within my own space. It should not have been complicated. The fact that Patricia and the HOA tried to take that freedom and failed says everything about the importance of standing your ground when you are in the right. Tomorrow I will tend my plants, film a video about winter growing techniques, and maybe grab coffee with Steve. The day after that will be similar, and the day after that. A string of ordinary, peaceful days earned through months of extraordinary struggle. I will never take that ordinary peace for granted again. The propane tank sits outside, secure behind its locked cage, mine to use as I see fit, exactly as it should be.